Hey guys, and welcome to another week's episode of the Top Producing Zone podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Jin.
And I'm your co-host, Shanne Carvalho.
We're hitting December now, and this is, I think, the perfect time for this topic, which is really setting yourself up for success in 2024. And so today we're going to talk about just the importance of goal setting and how to go about setting up the right goals for yourself.
Yeah, so I've actually already set my goals, which is shocking. I set them before December.
Well, there you go. Good man. You're already ahead of the game. Well, I mean, let's talk about a little bit why it's important to kind of get your goals set right now and why you should be kind of working towards it.
In our business, I mean, things don't just happen overnight. Like, the clients you're working with now, usually it takes 30, 60, 90 days to materialize some kind of a closed transaction. And really, if you want to have a good first quarter, you really have to start working on your first quarter in November, really at the latest. And a lot of people check out around Thanksgiving and don't show up till late January. And then they wonder why they don't have anything going on. And then they wonder why their first quarter sucks. And so, setting goals now and really laying out your game plan and also breaking them down by the quarter, not just annually, but, knowing what you got to put in to get the results you want in the first quarter.
Yeah, it really is a pretty important tip. And so if you haven't been following this in your business, you really should. A lot of people, they hit the holidays and they'll go on vacation, they'll go hang with friends or whatever it is, which is all, fine to do. But, they really don't think about their business until, the calendar hits January 1st and all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, what am I going to do for this year? And, if you look around, whether it's real estate or anything else, the people that really are successful and hit the ground running in January, they're the ones that, have their goals all ready to go in December. They have a game plan. And I think that's kind of the next thing I want to focus on is, what type of goal, like it's important not to just set goals for yourself, but also just, have a plan for how you're going to execute on those goals.
Yeah, well, the plan is actually just as important as setting the goals because you put numbers on paper and it's like, how do you get there? And you really need to have a game plan. And then, it's just not, I'm going to do this. And then you're just going to accomplish that. You need to know, especially like in our business, how many phone calls to my sphere of influence lead to an opportunity to do business. I mean, you really have to quantify what it takes to get there. Part of the pre-planning.
So, I mean, let's get tactical when it comes to goals. Like what makes a good goal for you?
I think that, people always talk about, well, let me just go really high and then swing for the fences and wherever I land, I land. And I don't know, everybody has kind of their approach. And then some people, they want a goal they can reach because growing up, they're probably the same people that got participation trophies, right? So it's like, oh, I got my goal. But no, it should be something that I think that, especially as you get established and you get more consistent with knowing kind of what you can accomplish, I think you should be pushing the boundaries on your prior year. I mean, that's, whether it's a percentage or however you decide to look at it. It doesn't have to be exactly scientific either, but you have a pretty good idea, especially once, and I know there's newer agents too that maybe don't have the track record yet. So it takes a little more, kind of feeling it out. But I think for people that have gotten more established, you just push the envelope a little bit, at the end of the year, just like, okay, well, I did, 40 million this year, but, next year, I think I could push it, 10%, I think I could do 44 million. And I think for next year, this is probably the biggest jump I've ever had. I'm more than doubling my goal. So that whole formula is out the window for 2024. But for me, I looked at what percentage of my business is listings, what percentage of my listings is buyers, and where the bulk of my clients come from. So I know kind of the time commitment. And so I went that route. I also averaged out what my average sale was last year so that when I'm looking at units, then I could determine volume as well as, income or profit.
No, I mean, and I think that's really important. I think it kind of gets back to something we've talked about in past episodes is, if you've already established, if you already kind of have a track record in your business, like, are you keeping track of your KPIs, which is my favorite acronym, which is, like your key, like it's true though, like what kind of metrics and like what kind of key performance indicators are you keeping track of in your business? And like you said, like you're keeping track of, out of the volume you did last year, how much of that was from listings? How much was that from buyers? right? And then if you're talking about listings, then it's like, okay, where did most of that business come from? Did it come from repeat and referral clients? And if it came from repeat and referral clients, then it's a matter of, okay, how often did you go and, follow up with these clients, right? Like what kind of click-through rate do you have on your newsletters, right? That got you those repeat and referral clients. I mean, these are just some areas that I'm kind of throwing out there that people can start looking at if you haven't been looking at it in your business, right? For buyers, same thing, right? If you're attracting new buyers, it's like, okay, what type of marketing ads did you set up for yourself this year, right? Was that effective? Or did most of your new buyers come from your sphere of influence? How often did you go and reach out to your friends and family, and what kind of success rate did you get from that? And so I think it's important to, like, if you're the analytical type, I think it's especially important to kind of just analyze your business over the last year and kind of see where did most of your leads and come from, and where like you were most effective, and see if that's something that you can double down on going into this next year. If that's something, if you want to say, like, you want to challenge yourself and grow your volume from like 40 million to 60 million.
Of course, you brought out the fancy word, the fancy acronym. But no, I mean, you're pretty much what you're saying. I mean, that's exactly what I do. At one point, when I was in this coaching program, we actually would track all of our calls or our mailers or our activity. And that form was a really good way to figure out, since you're actually tracking every call, every letter, everything you're doing, that was an excellent way to figure out how many attempts per conversion, right? So it's like, you'll know if it took 52 calls to get an opportunity. You could also track your conversion rate based on the opportunities you convert. And so you can literally like scientifically track this. It doesn't have to be a guess. Like, you could actually track it and come up with, real numbers and a real amount of time that it would take to accomplish that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important too. And if you are not tracking and you're looking for a good way to track, feel free to reach out to us. And I have my spreadsheets galore that I'm happy to share with the audience, just to kind of help you, keep track of some of your like key performance metrics and your conversion rates, and really just kind of help you take your business to the next level in this next year.
Yeah, and I'm not that fancy. I got a Google Doc I can help you with.
And like if you're a new agent, you're like, well, where do I even start? Like trying to figure out my like sales volume. We have a really nice, again, spreadsheet that we use, where you can, even if you don't have like your key performance metrics or indicators from your past performance, like you can at least make some assumptions, in terms of like how many calls do I have to make on the listing side, right? And then what a potential conversion rate might be based off of that. You put in a target goal in terms of how much volume and what your GCI you want to earn this year is going to be, and the spreadsheet will help you kind of figure out, okay, well, like based on how much volume I want to bring in, and my assumption in terms of what my conversion rate is going to be in terms of listing side and as well as buying side, like this is how many people, how many touch points I need to have every week and every month. And that'll really kind of help you game plan for this next year.
I think the other thing too is throughout the year, and I mean, maybe you're going to get to this, but I track all my closings. I do have tracking on, when I'm doing my prospecting during my time blocks and such. But I mean, as far as really keeping up with where you're at on your goals, some people say goals and then they don't even have like some kind of an accurate tracking system. So it's like, they don't even know where they're at versus their goals. But it's important to track and have all the data, because that obviously helps you for your future goals, right? Have as much information as you can. And then if you do anything out of the ordinary on a certain transaction, like for me, I have my contacts on Google. I'll go in and I'll make notes on that contact about, what it was. Was there a certain amount of work that was done on this particular property? Was there some kind of a credit or some kind of, just if there's anything that was out of the ordinary that happened, I'll document it so that I can reflect on that when I'm going through the numbers.
It is really important to track. And I think then that kind of, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because, it kind of gets to this whole idea of, when people set goals, like what makes a good goal? And I think a good goal is one that's attainable, that's specific, that you can measure. So then you can actually go and track it. Right. And it's something that has to have some kind of time component to it. It has to be bound by some sort of time, right? And I think when people, it's interesting, I dig into the time part of it. When people set goals, it's usually like, okay, by the end of next year, I want to do 40 million in sales and volume, right? But then they kind of just leave it at that, to your point, or they don't track. And so, what the next part of goal setting that I feel like is super important is, yeah, you're going to set yourself goals for this next year, but then go deeper than just that. Don't just say, hey, I'm going to do 40 million in sales. Like, break that down over the course of the year, over specific time periods. So then you can go back and evaluate your progress as you're tracking your results and see how you're doing against your goals. And so a good way to do about it is, if you have a year, just break it down into quarters. If you want to do 40 million in sales, figure out like, what does that look like every quarter? And it may not necessarily be evenly spread through each quarter, right? Quarter one, you could be laying the foundation, establishing your relationships, and typically January, February, March, like things really pick up in the spring. So you might be setting yourself up for March, April, May. So maybe if you want to do 40 million in sales, like January, February, March, quarter one, you might say, hey, I might only do 5 to 10 million, but then quarter two, April, May, June is really where I'm going to ramp up my sales effort because I've been building that relationship in December, January, February, and so on and so forth. Break it out into quarters so then you have a more specific game plan and check in with yourself so that way like, hey, after 3 months, how am I doing? If I'm not doing enough, then how do I ramp myself up? Versus then waiting towards the end of the year, you're not checking in with yourself, you're not measuring anything. You're like, oh shit, I set this 40 million goal and I didn't do anything towards it.
I would imagine that, you take it to another level just because you're so data and tech savvy. I think that, well, actually, you showed me some of your tracking. You probably have double the KPIs that I've even imagined.
I do like my spreadsheets, but I do like tracking my expenses, my business expenses was super important. But then I also kind of like to lay out, I have a whole spreadsheet I think I've shown you before where I kind of break out all the different video topics that I want to do throughout the year. And it's always it's kind of scheduled by week, by month. And I need to get better with that this year too. I think this last year has been great because, we've really gotten onto social media. We've really built a presence. We've gotten very consistent, posting at least 3 times a week. But, for me, I want to do more in this next year. And so I'm already even before we got into this recording tonight, I'm starting to lay out my content, my plans, and just try to get them scheduled out as much as possible going into this next year.
Yeah, well, I think it's helpful, if you actually can calendar that out. That's, at times we've kind of started to do that, at least on my stuff, but never really fully gotten to that point. I've also never really built enough, content to be far ahead enough, you know what I mean? So maybe that's something I should add to my goals, because I did talk about in my goals, committing to my time blocks and such, but, I probably should have spoken something, along those lines as well.
Well, I guess the only part I would add to that is depending on how many goals you already have for yourself, and it depends on how much you feel like you can execute too, right? Some people, I think when it comes to goal setting in the new year, it's a little hey, it's the new year. So it's like those health goals that people like to set for themselves, right? Where it's hey, it's the new year. I'm going to cut back I'm going to go on a diet for 3 months, or I'm going to drop 50 pounds and I'm going to go exercise. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I think the other part about goal setting that I want to bring up, what I think is really important, is that, when you're looking at setting goals, while the enthusiasm is great, also make sure you're you don't overdo it with goals for yourself, right? If you are the type of person that last year set 3 goals and you accomplished none of them, or you set 10 goals and you never accomplished any of them, maybe think about reining yourself back a little bit, right? And set 2 or 3 or 1 or 2 goals that you absolutely can, commit yourself to and feel like you can accomplish, right? Because otherwise it's just an exercise in paper pushing.
Yeah, no, agreed. So yeah, I was one of those people that did do the weight loss goal, but I've already been working on it. It was just, I was tactical about it. It wasn't just, oh yeah, this year I'm going to join the gym. I'm way ahead of that.
No, and you have to be. And that's good. You set yourself a goal and you're kind of you're actually You had a plan, you're executing towards it. And I think that's really just the key. So what, I mean, you've obviously been very, you've been doing this for a lot of years. Like what are some common like pitfalls that you've seen with agents, as it comes to like, setting the right goals for themselves or even being able to execute against those goals as they get into the new year?
Well, I think it's hard to get agents to commit to even set goals. I think
Oh,
less
okay.
than 10% of the agents around me even set goals. It's kind of like the 90-10 in our business where only 10% of us make it. What I've noticed when I talk to some agents is that, and I've tried to help with this, but some of them can't even figure out how to even set the goals. Like for instance, if some agents will be like, well, I want to make $100,000. So, okay, well, we can, reverse engineer it, right? But then, some of them have difficulty trying to figure out the math. So it's like there's not knowing. And then for a lot of people, it's just procrastination or just being lazy. But then if people do set their goals, I think like what we were talking about earlier, not having the steps, or the plan, then it just becomes kind of worthless. Like if they've already been doing real estate this year and they haven't really closed anything, and all of a sudden they want to close 8 transactions next year, a lot of times you get pretty much the same thing you've gotten for the last 2 years. It's the whole definition of insanity, right? Like
Yeah.
hoping that things will be different with the same action, and that's not the case, obviously. So yeah, I mean, there's a handful of reasons, and I mean, obviously, I always wish everyone well. I'm not trying to hate on people for not. I mean, I'm not good about and I'm the first to admit, like when I miss time blocks or I get busy or I procrastinate. I mean, I'm not perfect either, but yeah, I'm just sharing basically.
It sounds like there's kind of like multiple like pitfalls along the way, right? One, it's kind of how do I even go about goal setting? And then two, after you set your goals, okay, how do I go about actually doing something about it? And so hopefully kind of what we talked about briefly on this episode kind of will help agents at least give them some idea in terms of how to, go about doing this. And, one of the things that we've been kind of doing with the agents that have been joining our organization recently is, when they join, what we like to do is just sit down with them and do a deep dive into their business. And one of the things that we always kind of ask these agents is, okay, so, well, one, what is your goal for next year? And they'll usually throw out a number, like, hey, I want to do 100 million. Okay. Then how do you want to do that? Right. And I think one of the things I realized, and one of the pieces of advice I give to the listeners out there is you could do this yourself. The analogy I would use is like peeling back the layers of the onion. Right. And I think this is how you kind of help yourself to overcome some of those pitfalls with goal setting and then execution is after you set a goal, like just keep asking yourself, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And just take it one level at a time and just dig in deeper with yourself. So if your goal is to say, okay, I'm going to do 100 million this year. Okay, well, how am I going to do that? Right? I'm going to get 20% from, repeat and referral clients. I'm going to, get 40% of my business from, new business from like cold calling. And obviously these percentages I'm throwing out there are probably not going to be accurate, but it's just an example, right? And then I'm going to get the rest like social media leads or whatever it is, right? And then I dig into it more. Okay, if I want 20% from friends and family, how am I going to go about doing that, right? I'm going to go and send out a newsletter every month. I'm going to reach out to like 10 friends or family every week, right? How am I going to do that? How am I going to reach out to them? I'm going to text them, right? Or I'm going to get them on the phone and just catch up. Or I'm going to go take them out for coffee. Like, so you kind of see my point is like, just keep asking yourself how, so then you can actually go from very big idea to very kind of concrete steps for yourself.
I agree with you.
Anything else that you kind of want to share with agents out there on, like what advice would you have for them on just like setting the right goals?
Well, I think that especially if you're new and you don't have like the track record to know what you can actually accomplish, and that's fine if you have your dream, like I want to be a $100 million agent, that's fine, especially in our company because there are agents that are full-time. There's agents that have a second job. I think that you need to start off with realistically how much time can you commit, and then whatever kind of prospecting you're already doing, then you know how long it takes to ballpark to get a lead. And so I think that you have to be realistic. You have to be realistic with your time. Like if you do have another job, just be okay, well, I can commit, 4 hours a week or 6 hours a week or whatever. Well, temper your expectations, based on that. Um, you can't just walk in, especially part time, and expect to be $100 million agent, So I would temper the expectation based on the time you can commit. And then I think that it would also be important to work with a mentor, right? Have a mentor evaluate, what you're doing, and also kind of what your thoughts are that you want your goals to be, and then have them help you, right? Like I help some of my mentees, do their goals. And I love numbers, and so it's like I love getting to the numbers with them, and then
Yep.
we can talk strategy.
Yep.
I think that the last thing I would share is that as a new agent, you might get really hot on a certain type of lead. Oh, I really want to buy Zillow leads, or I really want to, go door knock, whatever. I think that when you're kind of goes along the lines of time, right? You got to think about what's going to give you the highest conversion.
Yep.
And if you really are obsessed with doing a certain type of prospecting, that's fine. But I would still time block for other kinds of prospecting with a higher return.
Yep.
Like if you want to cold call just out of a phone book, that's going to be the lowest conversion rate possible, because you're going to reach people that are not even in the market, So it's like, if that's something you're really obsessed with doing, maybe do it for an hour twice a week, and then block out some other times to do stuff with a higher conversion rate. And if you're not sure what that is, talk to your mentor, talk to your colleague, talk to your broker.
So, I think let's wrap up and summarize. Like we talked about goal setting in this week's episode, why it's important, why you should get a head start on it to make sure you set yourself up for success. And then when you do set your goals, make them measurable, make them time specific, make them reasonable and realistic for yourself, right? If you need help, like reach out to Shane or I. We have, the tools, the spreadsheets to kind of help you set the right goals for yourself, and also be able to make sure you're tracking them consistently throughout the year. And like Shane said, if you have any questions or you want to bounce your ideas off of somebody, like talk to a mentor, talk to your broker, reach out to one of us. Happy to kind of help you with your business and make sure that you set yourself up for success this next year.
Great recap. I think you got it all. Thank you so much, Mr. Jen.
Oh, thank you, Shane. All right, guys. Well, hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Top Producing Zone podcast, and we'll catch you all again next week.
Take care.